So Shalom, it's May the 3rd. We are going to discuss Parshat Behar B'chukotai. We're really going to discuss only a few verses in Parshat Behar, even though it's a double Parsha, an amazing Parsha, amazing two Parshas. I hope you're watching our Parsha talk. And I don't know if this is going to be a lighter presentation or a heavier presentation. I have some ideas, and let's get right into it. I'm going to start with some clips of motivational speeches, and the reason why I'm going to focus on that will be evident through the example that is in the text. Let me just bring up some things here. I'm just going to get this. The text, the thing set up here. Okay, here we go. This is a wrestler guy, and his name. This I'm calling this "What Happens If?" the Torah's Answers to Doubt and Motivation. And this is, I want to say as we start, the motivational speech is now it's almost a cliche in American culture. I think you can find any example anywhere, and almost all movies. It's a classic setup. Hoosiers, for example, that great movie. It's all the miracle. In sport movies, there's always the great coaching scene, and even in war movies and other kinds of movies where even Thelma and Louise. I was going to show the clip, where they resolve at the end to run off the cliff, and in some ways that would have taken us away. Here, I just want to let's do some of this. This is Mike Kinney is a motivational speaker, and it's a TED Talk, and I'm going to make it bigger for everybody. Hope everybody sees it. Yes, you got it?
There. Picture it. A big, sweaty, tattooed man in a cowboy hat and chaps is in the ring as the arena full of fans cheer him on. Their hero, Cowboy Gator McGraw. Gator bounces off the ropes and is quickly body slammed to the mat. His wild opponent leaps into the air, crashing down onto Gator's ribcage. Gator struggles to breathe, wondering, is this really what my father wanted for me? That wild man in the chaps was me.
I'm going to make it faster, just to...
And the answer to the question, surprisingly, is yes. I grew up watching professional wrestling with my dad. And like him, I loved everything about it. The showmanship, the athletic skill, the drama. I'd be this little boy bouncing all over our living room, pretending to be my favorite wrestlers from TV. My dad actually reminded me a little bit of Hulk Hogan, but I was Hulk Hogan and he was Andre the Giant. I'd get all serious on him and say things like, Dad,
Oops, I'm sorry.
Someday I am going to be world heavyweight champion. And he would usually smile and very calmly say, okay, then I guess I can count on you to be my retirement fund. When I was 16, a small wrestling show came to my little town in Minnesota. I couldn't believe it. Nothing like that had ever come to my town before. So of course, I got to the arena early in the morning, the day of the show, waiting out in the parking lot to see if I could spot some wrestlers pulling up in their cars. It wasn't as creepy as it sounds. But I could definitely tell who the wrestlers were just by the way they walked. They were tall and confident and intimidating, with their tank tops and Zubas and fanny packs. Why wouldn't I want to be them? All I could think about was, who are these people and what are they like? How did they become wrestlers? So before the show started, I walked into this tiny arena, more like a gymnasium, and I asked them if I could help set up their wrestling ring. Sure, kid, no problem. And then I pleaded with them to show me some wrestling moves. Sure, kid, no problem. Man, they would just punch and kick me hard, but I never complained. They would come to my town for one night every couple of months that year, and then poof, the next day, they were gone. By the next year, they finally told me about an actual wrestling training camp that one of the wrestlers was running, and I begged my parents to sign me up. Next thing I knew, I was a high school senior by day, and wrestling in front of live audiences by night. I had this giant poster of an alligator hanging on my bedroom wall, so when I needed to come up with the wrestling name at the last minute, and Jesse the Body Ventura was already taken, I went with Gator. I also wrestled in a t-shirt and camouflage pants because that's what I had in my closet. I hadn't quite figured out how to develop my own persona yet, but I was learning. It was sort of like an apprenticeship. But I was a wrestler. And my dad would come to all of my matches wearing a t-shirt that said Papa Gator across the front. And he bragged to his friends about how his son was going to pay for his retirement someday. And I would have. Not long after I started wrestling, my dad unexpectedly passed away. And as you can imagine, especially as a teenage boy, it destroyed me. If you've ever lost someone, you know what a difficult time that can be. Your mind, it's not working right. The whole thing is just so surreal. I wanted to feel normal again, even if it was for just a second, so I went back to wrestling almost immediately. Wrestling belonged to me and my dad, you know? So there I was, sitting in the locker room, getting ready for a match within days of my dad passing away. He was gone. And sitting there alone, it felt like I was hiding. But it also felt like I needed to be there. One of the wrestlers who'd been on the scene a long time knew what I was going through, and he came over to see how I was holding up. I couldn't get the words out. I just said, I don't know what I'm doing. And then we just sat there in silence, just silence. Before he got up to get ready for his own match, he gave me this piece of advice that would change the entire direction of my life. He told me the best wrestlers are just themselves, but turned up. He said successful wrestlers find the traits within them in themselves they're the strongest at and make those the focus of who they become in the ring. So there I sat, a scared teenager who didn't know who he was or why he was even wrestling anymore. I looked around the locker room with some of the other wrestlers and I thought, I look so different. How can I ever be like them? And then it hit me. That's the moment I realized I didn't have to be like them. What I did have to do was find out what did it mean to be me? What made me unique? And how could I use it to my advantage? Now, I knew I wasn't a chiseled athlete like some of these guys, but I really didn't care. So the first thing I thought was, how can I amplify something as simple as comfortable with my own body? I didn't know. And then I thought, Speedo. Or trunks, as we call them in wrestling. Yeah, trunks. I could be this big guy who was comfortable wearing these little trunks in front of a bunch of strangers. So I ditched the t-shirt and camouflage pants, and Gator's new wardrobe was born. I was also pretty good at drawing cartoons, so I wondered if I could turn that up. I could design my own wrestling costumes. So each pair of trunks would have its own unique design and color, all of them completely different. And extremely comfortable, by the way. And I was also the funny kid in school, believe it or not. So I thought maybe I could turn that up. Maybe I could be the boy, go from the boy who made his buddies laugh to the man who could rally hundreds or thousands. So I committed to the idea that my character wasn't going to be as scary as some of the others. I'd be hilarious from the moment I walked into the arena. With every wrestling match, I dug deeper. I found out that I could laugh at myself. So this guy would dance and sing his entrance music all the way to the ring. I was dancing, by the way. I found out that I was an okay wrestler, but I was an even better entertainer. And turning myself up made me unforgettable to the fans. I was trying to find those things about me, the simple things that were special, and then ask, how can I turn them up? Now, I knew I wanted my character to be a man's man like my dad was. I thought, what's more of a man's man than a cowboy? And that's when Gator became Cowboy Gator. Yeah, I needed a last name. And I thought about it until my head hurt. I couldn't come up with anything. I was sitting there watching TV one night, flipping through the channels, and this commercial comes on, talking about a country singer who had just won an Entertainer of the Year award, Tim McGraw. He's a cool cowboy with a great last name, and I liked his music. It was just all part of my process. But I just kept turning myself up until I became Cowboy Gator McGraw. And I knew that if I kept turning myself up and pushing myself harder, the opportunities would come. And then it finally happened. In the middle of the night, I got a phone call. It was the call I wish my dad was around to hear. The WWE, the biggest wrestling organization in the world, wanted me to come and be a part of Monday Night Raw. Yes, all of my hard work and miles on the road were finally paying off. I got to walk down the WWE Raw entrance ramp on live television, dressed up as a fake security guard to escort another wrestler to the ring. I was disappointed I didn't get to wrestle, but very few wrestlers get any kind of call from the WWE, maybe one in a few hundred. And becoming Cowboy Gator McGraw is what got me there. So instead of walking away that day, I decided to turn myself up again and become the best security guard I could. In fact, I did it so well, I was the only guard to get a close-up on TV that night. It's a big deal, you know? And I got to sit backstage that entire day with some of the most famous pro wrestlers in the world, some of which were heroes of mine as a kid. And I got to listen to them and learn from them. And for that day, I was accepted as one of them. maybe my experience with the WWE wasn't ideal. I mean, I didn't get to wrestle, but it made me work harder, turning myself up louder year after year. I was becoming the biggest version of myself in the ring, and other people took notice. Before I knew it, I'd gone from wrestling maybe once a month in Minnesota to as often as 4 times a week all over the United States on the independent wrestling circuit. I was literally living my dream. While wrestling over the next few years, I suffered a pretty bad shoulder injury right around the same time that my wife and I found out that we were expecting our first child. And I know what you're thinking, but believe me when I say those 2 events are completely unrelated. But I needed shoulder surgery, and I wanted to be home with my family. It was my turn to be a dad. So on July 27th, 2007, I wrestled my final match and walked away from professional wrestling to pursue the next chapter of my life. And as time passed, the strangest things started to happen. I found out that once someone has been turned up, it's pretty hard to turn them down. I left the ring, but Gator stayed with me, and I used the turned up version of myself every day. My beautiful wife has been with me through this entire journey. And by the way, she does not like pro wrestling, like at all. But she was always my biggest fan. She still is. She knows there's always going to be some part of Gator McGraw in here. And she wants our daughter and twin sons to discover themselves the way that I did. But probably with fewer body slams and steel chair shots to the head. I mean, do you know how many times she's had to remind me not to clothesline the referees at my kids' soccer games? I mean, it was just the one time, and my daughter was clearly fouled. As a parent now, I've begun to realize that my dad wanted something much more valuable than a retirement fund. Like most parents, he just wanted his kids to reach their fullest potential. I'm trying to teach my children that turning yourself up is just not some perfect idea of how to be great. It's a way of living. Constantly looking for what makes you different and how you can amplify it for the world to see. And by the way, my kids don't like wrestling either. But that's okay with me, because they each have their own unique talents that can be turned up just like the rest of us. My one son, he's a whiz at electronics, so maybe helping him turn up makes him become the next Steve Jobs. My other son, my daughter, they're great at art, so maybe helping them turn up their gifts helps them become the next Pablo Picasso. You never know what you have the ability to do until you dig. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I mean, look around. They say that if you get nervous in front of an audience, you just imagine them in their underwear, but then I think, hey, I've wrestled in less. Look, the wrestling circus doesn't need to come to your town before you get an invitation to be the real you, the bigger, more stunning version of yourself. Doesn't even necessarily come from our parents. Turning yourself up means looking inward toward our true selves and harnessing the voice that says, maybe, just maybe, I am more than I thought I was. Thank you.
Okay, that's look, it may be a little far from our text, okay, but it's a classic example, you know, and it's a classic example of a motivational speech which has as its goal, you know, just be yourself, dig down deep, and be more of yourself, and that's the motivation. And look, for 12 minutes or less, if I had it on speed, you know, speeds playing, you know, it's a message that gives you an inspiration, and of course it's classically American in the sense that, you know, this culture really is based on a sense of that you can do anything as long as you put your mind to it, as long as you dig that, as long as you know who you are. It's really a master story. Let me, I you know, can't talk about motivational speaking without you know, just a couple of you know, here, just a second.
To be your own man and take on the world, and you did. But somewhere along for something to blame, like a big shadow. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. Okay, so you can write this speech, the rest of the speech. It's going to end up the same thing, and of course, the classic. Anywhere you go, this one is the classic.
Brian, Stacy.
Here we go.
Wrap it around and pull it down and put it in my pocket. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're probably going to find out as you go out there that you're not going to amount to jack squat. You're going to end up eating a steady diet of government cheese and living in a van down by the river.
Okay. So that's the classic motivational speaker. And let's get to our text. God said to Moses on Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years may you sow your field, and 6 years may you prune your vineyard and gather the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. And then it goes on, eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce, you, your male and female slaves, etc. You shall count off 7 weeks of years to the 50th year. And verse 10, you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim the release from the land, throughout the land for all its inhabitants. I'm going to skip. In this year of Jubilee, verse 13, each of you shall return to his holding. And then verse, here is the key. You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules, that you may live upon this land, the land in security. And the land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. Now, the crisis. And should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year, if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until its crops come in. I want to go back to this. This is the key verse. You have a whole passage on the sabbatical year, the 7th year, and you know that during the sabbatical year, you're not supposed to work the land. You're not supposed to plant, and you're not supposed to harvest. Whatever comes up wild, question whether or not you can eat, but you are not to use anything produced from the land, and that is the 7-year cycle. After 7 cycles of 7 years, in year 49 is a sabbatical year, and year 50 is a Jubilee year, and year 50 is the great reset and the great sabbatical. And it seems what the Torah is saying is that not only will you be sabbatical, not work the land year 49, but year 50 also is a sabbatical. You get a 2-year sabbatical when you get to the end of the 7-year cycle, 49 and 50. It's not a coincidence that we are in the middle of the 7-week cycle. You've often heard me talk about this, that the year is really structured in this way. If I could make just a tiny bit of a stretch, the year really does consist of 7 cycles of 7 weeks. I mean, a year, a solar year is 365 days. 7 50s is 350. We're not that far off. The lunar year is actually much less. These don't really correspond exactly, but it's not hard for me, at least, to imagine that in some way this would captivate the imagination of an ancient person, that the year goes into 7 cycles, and we are presently in a 7-week cycle, culminating on Shavuot. Today's the 36th day of the Omer. We counted 36 last night, so we have less than a couple of weeks to go. Shavuot is Sunday night on the 16th of May. So the idea that we spend time in the calendar and spend time both in the annual calendar, the weekly calendar, the monthly calendar, and the calendar of years, I think, of course, is a very significant feature of Judaism. You've heard me say many times that the calendar is an identity-forming instrument. But there's a problem, and the problem is the obvious problem, which is, if you're going to have a sabbatical, what are you going to eat? What are you going to eat year 7? And if you're going to have a Jubilee, that is year 7, which is year 49, then what are you going to do in year 50? And then what are you going to do in year 51, which is the first year of the next cycle? So that's the question here. What are we going to eat? And I think there's a deeper question in there. We'll get to that in a second. What are we to eat in the 7th year if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until the crops come in. In other words, you're gonna harvest so much on year 6 that year 7 is going to be fine, year 8 is going to be fine, and in year 8 you will be able to grow stuff so that you'll be able to reap in the 9th year. Exactly how the calendar works is complicated. We're going to see, and I'm not going to go into because when do you work, when not. In the Ramban, Nachmanides deals with it in his commentary. I just want to get your reaction. I'm going to keep the text up here for a second and just repeat it because I know you need it in front of you, which is, so year 6, you're going to have a bumper crop. Year 7, you're going to be fine. Year 8, you're going to be, and year 9, you're going to be fine. You'll be fine. So what is your reaction to this as an answer to this question, what are we to eat for the 7th year? Let me try and open it up to your reactions, if I can. Ilana.
Should we trust this announcement? I mean,
the immediate reaction is, what are you telling me? What are you telling me about? I don't even know what the weather is going to be tomorrow, right? Let alone a year from now. And here we are. Here we are living in this in an era of climate change. Where every single day of every single day you're hearing another alarming story about what's going to be. If we don't do this now, what's going to be? If we don't stop consumption of fossil fuels, then the climate's going to increase by 1 point something degrees. The glaciers are going to melt. The glaciers are going to melt. I'm just going to mute. The glaciers are going to melt, and we're going to die. Okay, right? So what do we do with all of this uncertainty? And yet, the Torah is saying not only do you have nothing to worry about, but on the contrary, adrabah, you have everything to rely on. Anybody else react to this? Marlene, go ahead. Okay.
How do you do all that work if it's full-time work to get what you need for now? How much more so if you need to have work for 3 years?
Yes, exactly. So I'm just sorry. I'm just asking to mute because I'm getting the reaction, the response here. In a way, what it's doing is demanding of us. It's demanding of us that we plan. Let me take from your question and direct into some of the commentary that I am writing here on this. Okay, so here I'm saying as follows. What is motivating the question of the verse? Okay, note that there are 3 parts of the question. What are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? And I'm saying, though we didn't plant, it's an exclamation, but it's also embedded in the we didn't plant is a question, and we didn't harvest is also embedded. In other words, the concealed story of these questions is, look, God, you're telling us not to plant and not to harvest. Those are 2 different sets of activities. And you're telling us, first of all, that you're going to be, that you're telling us not to plant and not to harvest. You're telling us that we're going to have, but we don't have it in front of us. What are we going to eat? Now, I say the concealed story of these questions is the story of food anxiety. Food anxiety is a common feature of human civilization. What are we going to eat? is a question that arises from scarcity, wildness. And I'm just put the pre-agricultural times where there are no systems in place to manage the production of the field. Agriculture depends on wisdom, systems, rules, process, foresight, and the structured order of nature, seasons, and the climate. I think I wrote this myself, you know, blah, 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 you know, very, very smart here. But what I'm trying to say, and I'm trying to capture is something very simple, which is I have a little herb garden, okay, a box, okay. I don't know the first thing about growing plants, okay. You know, I could learn very easily what it means to grow plants, but any of you, and I would like to take a little poll here, any of you who has tended to a garden or tried to grow a vegetable garden has encountered, I think, a certain set of problems, which is, you know, how do we keep it? When do we tend it? When do we weed it? When do we water it? How much water, how much shade, how much sun, etc. Where does it go? And especially in, you know, in Highland Park, you know, we have all these deer. So you're growing tomatoes. I saw Skip here because Skip always grew tomatoes, right? So you grow tomatoes. And how do you prevent the deer from eating the tomatoes? And you don't realize that even in something as simple as growing tomatoes, there's an awful lot of inherited wisdom that you need to have. And that growing something from the ground requires a certain amount of knowledge and structure and preparedness. And all of that is something that's far removed from us, you know, especially, you know, at a farmer scale. At a farmer scale. Especially on the scale of a farmer. I don't know. Anybody have any reaction to that? Go ahead, Bob.
Just a question, are there any echoes or resonances with Joseph and famine in Egypt?
You know, I thought about that, and I think that's a very insightful comment. Not because I thought of that, but because I think there's a scholar who actually thinks that what we have in Leviticus is echoes of all of the Genesis narratives in different laws. And I think that this is something because Egyptian society is an agrarian society, agricultural society, as opposed to the shepherd society. In other words, they're living off of wheat produce, mostly grain. And second, they have to manage it. And what you have in the management of an agriculture, what you have in agriculture society is the need to manage society. You need to manage resources. You need to manage water. You need to manage seed. You need to manage labor, right? All of that is so necessary. So once you start building an economy based on agriculture, it doesn't produce, you know, just like that. You know, again, we are so naive when it comes to food since we are so urban. You know, if we lived closer to the land and closer to farms as we did 2 or 3 generations ago, we would see that a tree needs proper care. The field needs proper. If you grow vegetables or roots in a root garden or a root, these things require, and we don't have all that information. That's why I say it, you know, trivially, you know, I mean, I'm trying to grow, you know, parsley in a box, and you know, I don't know the first thing. I just plant a seed and it's the thing it grows. It's not that simple. Lila, you have to.
The question.
Go ahead.
Living through the pandemic and hearing about looking for workers out in the fields in California and things like that, and people say they can't get help. In those 3 years, the laborers can't, what did they do? How did they spend their time, and how did they make a living?
So it's a wonderful question. So the idealized answer to that question is, of course, they took the time to do what we should do on a sabbatical, which is
study Torah.
Torah, right? So the idealized version of this is they study.
Ein kemach, ein Torah.
Absolutely. Okay, no flour, no Torah, no flour. I it's not that I'm skeptical about that. It's just that there are things that one does, and even in agricultural economy, in sabbatical, you could see, and what I'm trying to go for here is that in the system inherently is a tension. The tension is, how are we going to manage and what are we going to do? It's precisely your question, Lila. And how are we going to subsist on work? Look, we have just experienced and are still very much in the midst of, what happens when a whole economy is disrupted, and people can't go to work, and people, the kinds of service industries or education or every kind of industry, restaurants and hospitality, entire sectors of the economy are completely shut down because the normal way that we exist doesn't function anymore. We can't function anymore. So in a way, the sabbatical functions as a disruption, but there's one difference to the disruption, and we kind of sense this, which is that this disruption, economic, agricultural disruption, is on the calendar. In other words, as Bob, kind of hinted, it's like Joseph, the brilliance of Joseph, the genius of Joseph was that he understood the calendar in a way that his Egyptian overlords didn't. He had insight, I guess you could say it was prophetic insight. He knew that Egypt was now in the experiencing bumper harvest, and that down over the horizon was a famine, and that he had to plan for it. And so what is embedded in this narrative is, not only is God going to provide for you, but you need to understand that God will provide for you. And if you understand that God will provide for you, you're not supposed to be passive about it. You are supposed to be active about it, right? The farmer is going to have a healthy dose of, I know that this is going to be year 7, 8, and 9. And well, if I don't make sure it happens, I have to make sure it happens. God is promising, and I have to join in that promise. So I want to just so agriculture depends on this. We didn't plant, we didn't reap, our challenges to the fundamental core of the system. Why do we have these rules? Why do we have to follow this every 7 years, every 49 years? So embedded in those questions really is a structural question that shakes up the very core, or it addresses the very core of the agricultural economy and I think, authority. It's a question of faith, right? How are we going to live is really a question of faith. And that's where the motivation piece comes in, because the motivation is, you need the motivation to understand that you're going to be able to survive. So what's the Torah's answer to the question? The Torah's answer to the question, I'm just going to slide up again. The Torah's answer is, I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year. Vitziviti et birchati. And what it means is that God is going to create and make it irrepressible. It is a command. And here, embedded in this text, is the notion that the earth responds to God's command. So God, I will command my blessing. It's a very unique formulation here, that the earth will respond to my command, and I will command my blessing in the 6th year, so that it will yield crop. For 3 years, we'll have a triple crop. Okay, and you will then be harvested. That's the Torah's answer. Okay, is this realistic? Well, only if you consider what your role is. The Jubilee system stretches the limits of faith, but motivates ingenuity. You have to plan ahead. Your planning will result in God's blessing. Without the divine human partnership in structuring the agricultural economy, the Jubilee could result in calamity. All right. Yes, go ahead, Marlene.
We're not a total agricultural economy anymore.
So this is true. And I suspect also that the biblical economy was also not a completely agricultural economy. After all, there were shepherds as well, which is what we call agriculture, but it's a different kind of sustenance. No, people in the Bible also, built their economy on trades and skills and crafts, and it's obvious that the system has a built-in stress to it. Hillel understood that, and of course, elsewhere in the Torah we have the idea that it's here in the Torah that debts are forgiven in the sabbatical year. Well, what happens when debts are forgiven? I mean, I don't want to be too political here, except to say that if as is being touted by some echelons of the political hierarchy, that all student debt will be forgiven, who's going to want to lend, right? Or and how is liquidity going to function in an economy, in the education economy, when there's no tuition anymore? When it's tuition, is it all going to come out of the government? Well, at some point, somebody's going to have to pay for it. That's the reality. Okay.
Rabbi, could you still eat meat? If you couldn't reap and you couldn't sow, could you still eat meat?
You'd eat meat, yes, and you'd eat the previous harvests, right? You would have plenty of bountiful harvest to eat off of. Look, I mean, you all have the experience of going to the grocery store. We live in a different economy now where you can get your tropical fruit all 12 months a year. But there are certain seasons of, certain times of the year when you can't get, certain things. But the apples, for example, apples are harvested in the fall, but you can have apple. I mean, why is it that it's, April, May, and I have fresh apples? Because they've been stored. They're in the system. Or, we transport everything from places that produce the things freshly. But not in antiquity, dial back just a couple of decades ago, you couldn't get fresh produce out of its season, right? And there are places now, in the artisanal world, the farm to table world, where you will go to a farm to table restaurant and they only serve you things that are produced in that season. Okay. I mean, that's the way it was. And we all lived that way nicely until we discovered that you can bring avocados from Mexico 12 months a year. Okay. Let's look. I'm going to show you how complicated this gets. I'm only bringing the Maimonides Ramban to show you that we could twist ourselves up in a pretzel on this. So the verse is, as it were, inverted, meaning, and if you shall say in the 7th year, what shall we eat in the 8th year? Further worry would be about the 8th year. For since the beginning of the sabbatical year and the Jubilees in Tishrei, then they would eat of the produce of the 6th year during the 7th year, as is the normal way in all other years to eat of the old produce until after I already don't understand what's going on. Okay. So in other words, it's complicated and we have a complicated system. Let me go. I want to skip over this because there's a much more psychological comment here from.
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
This is has to do not just being practical or not. How do you what is your attitude toward a certain statement that comes in the Torah that God says, okay, I will give the blessing, everything is going to be okay. Because some people can make a mistake and just say, okay, God will provide and will do the best, but it should be taken very seriously that that's not the meaning of this blessing. You have to earn the blessing in order to get what you need from the for your food, for what you need.
I think that that's precisely the theological point, which is, and I think here, and I'm going to just to amplify what Ilana is saying here, as a modern reader, this is precisely where we have this kind of tension with the text, and I think that's why the tension really kind of pulled me, which is what you're saying here is that it's going to be okay, you know, shash you know, whatever, what is, and to a certain extent, that's a very religious attitude, but to a certain extent, it's also I don't want to say not a religion. It's a fantasy, right? And our lives are lived in the sense that I'll say it in a different way, which is, you know, when someone, you know, unfortunately is experiencing a terrible sickness, you know, we say pray for a miracle, but you know what? Go to a doctor too, right? You know, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. You know, we in Judaism we do say al tismoch ala nes, don't rely on miracles, and yet we also, you know, there's the Ben Gurion, you know, quote, you know, as a realist I believe in miracles, or something like that. He's saying, you know, to be a realist is to believe in miracles, and what he's expressing there is to say, look, we are always doing our best to predict and to protect and to plan and to, you know, we are living our lives maximally with every degree of precaution and prevention and preparation, and that enables us to rely on the miracle, right? And what we're saying is that even with all of that, you do need, and we would say, luck, right? You know, and this is life's wisdom. Life's wisdom is that you can prepare and plan and do and really do everything possible. But there is an added ingredient always, and we would, you know, this to the secular person it would be, you have to have a little luck, you have to have a little mazel. That's not a secular person. That's a religious person speaking. You have to have a little mazel, right? And but to a devout person, there is an understanding that mazel doesn't come out of thin air, right? You know, there is, it's a really good conversation to have about destiny or serendipity. Do things happen by accident, or do things happen because you plan for them? And in life, you know, sometimes things do fall into your lap, but things fall into your lap for a reason too, because you're there, right? You know, if you travel a lot, it's quite likely that you'll bump into people who travel a lot, and you'll have these kinds of experiences. If you're looking for something, you're gonna find something. You know, I recommended these books by Philippe Sands a while ago, called The Rat Line and East West Street, and these are memoirs about, you know, different parts of his ancestry and the Holocaust, in which one chance meeting leads to another chance meeting, leads to another chance meeting, and leads to a story that is something that he's trying to find. This theme happens all the time in this literature, that I'm you know, talking about this, and I happen to be in a place where someone hears it, and I meet someone, and I make a discovery. Well, you could argue that all of this is a result of chance, or you could argue that, you know, by putting myself out there all the time, I'm going to meet who I need to meet. And so I think the religious imagination has to always live on this tightrope. The tightrope, it's a tension between what you do in partnership with the world and the universe and God, and what you hope for. And that's what's going on here. We are living, I think when it says, I will command my blessing, it's also saying, I am making my part in the universe work. And therefore, you should imitate me and make your part of the universe work too. Do not be passive in this. It won't happen. You have to plant, you have to sow, you have to till the soil. You just can't expect that, you're going to get your bountiful crops by doing nothing and by waiting for the blessing. Yes, you will have to, I'll make it rain, but you have to make sure that the day that it doesn't rain, you're prepared. I think that there's tremendous wisdom. Bob.
Rabbi.
Wait 1 second. Bob had his hand, then Skip. Okay. Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just wanted to say, does this also connect up with the sounding of the shofar on Jubilee and the fact that not only do we fast on that day, but we fast from the new produce of the land for that year?
I think there's something connected to that. I think, and here I have to rely on my friend Morty Schwartz. He knows a lot more about this than I do. The whole idea of eating from the new produce and doing the ritual to do that. We are in the midst of that right now. The Omer rituals were, the eating of the new harvest. In order to eat from the new harvest, you had to make an offering first. The offering is a kind of permission. It says God is entitled, the author of the universe, the ruler of the universe is at least entitled to the gratitude reflected in our offering of the first fruits, and therefore is entitled to it in the way that sacrifice is understood. And only then do we get the kind of green light to eat from the new produce. So the new produce portion of it has to be consecrated in order for all of it to be eaten. Until that time, until the consecration, you are not allowed to eat of it. You still eat from the old produce. And I think that that's something what's going on there. As to whether or not it's going on at Tishrei, I don't know for sure, but that's, this system is in place there. Skip.
No, Rabbi, I'm sort of taking a different look at this.
Go ahead.
And God rested on the seventh day.
Yes.
Okay. So the land is resting on the seventh year. It's rejuvenating itself. And as you said before, I plant tomatoes.
Yes.
So I know where I'm going with this. The land has to rejuvenate. And, we talk about God providing for, future years during the seventh year, but we're not talking about the fundamental issue here, at least in my mind.
So
It's the rejuvenation of the land.
Yes. Let me interrupt you here and say that scholars do look at that, and that there is within the agricultural wisdom, there's the notion that you need to let the portions of your land go fallow in order to replenish themselves of nutrients, topsoil, etc. I mean, that is in agriculture in general, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about God as the owner of the earth, and you are a tenant. It's the same, but it's different. Bonnie, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I think what you were saying is God helps those who help themselves.
So I am saying that, and I'm trying to say it in a more sophisticated way, obviously, because it's a simple proverb, but it's embedded in this is the note that your society is organized this way. I mean, we don't have the appreciation of that because we all do different things that are so unrelated to the agricultural economy. But if we lived in an agricultural society, we'd have to share things. We'd have to share labor, we'd have to share resources if we needed to, and we'd have to, I'm sorry, talking about the pre-modern agricultural economy, where, and more like the Moshav economy or the kibbutz economy, which is more familiar to us, from the Israeli context, in which people share heavy equipment, people share pool labor, pool resources, pool capital, in order to make sure that the produce can happen. And that requires a structure, it requires leadership, it requires organization, it requires a certain kind of politics, it requires a whole economy that we are so far removed from. We rely on a different economic chain. Imagine, as we experienced over the last 12 months, when the supply chain is disrupted, that's incredible. I don't know if you had the experience, any one of you tried to order something and, you get this note, let's say from Amazon saying, we cannot promise overnight delivery or tomorrow delivery because, the supply chains have been disrupted. People who tried to buy toilet paper 10 months ago, they told you, I don't know if they're still saying this, you cannot walk out of the store, out of Target with more than one thing of toilet paper. That's insane.
Shortage because everybody stocked up when they didn't have to.
Exactly.
Human elements came into this whole thing.
Exactly. And so, it's precise. It's a uniquely American and Canadian, I suppose, phenomenon in the sense that we are concerned about ourselves, and we lose sight of the communal impulse to take care of each other, right? And because I think, when I reflect back on March 2020, we were all scared, like we're going to stay in our houses for a month, 2 months. What are we going to do? Where are we going to get food? That's the anxiety here. And so, in a way, hovering underneath this is the recognition of this anxiety that where are we going to get food from? I can remember feeling this, like saying, you can't go to a store, so you're going to order food. So many people have, and they did. And I did also. I ordered stuff, came from Ohio, the beautiful, vegetables. And it's ridiculous, to spend that kind of money on this. We are not built that way. We're built on a different economic structure. The society, the biblical society was built on an implied partnership. Let me share with you this comment from the Malbim. He says, the phrase is v'chi tomru, when you say, and he writes, Malbim writes, I have already explained that there's a difference between ki and in, when you do it and if you do it. The word in, if, conveys possibility, and the word ki, when, conveys certainty. In Hebrew is sheyesh hevdel b'milat ki u'v'milat in. Milat in more hasafek u'milat ki more havadai. That is, if gives you a sense of possibility, and when says it's definite, right? Because this text doesn't say if you're going to say, it shows that you are definitely going to say this. You're certainly going to say, because God knows there are inclinations that they will definitely say this. In other words, God knows that our natural inclination is to doubt, right? This is an experience that anybody who sat on a committee has had, which is, if you have a problem in front of you, right, there is going to be someone on the committee who's going to ask, what about this? What's going to happen this? Right now, the issue on our agenda is, how are we going to reopen? So, someone suggested, well, what's going on in different congregations is that they have to show you that you're vaccinated. So I say, my immediate response to that is, and you're going to stand at the door and look at people's cards? Is that what you're going to do? And then what are you going to do when someone says, I was vaccinated, don't have their card? And then what are you going to do when someone says, well, I'm not vaccinated? They're going to stop them from being in shul? Or are you going to tell them to sit somewhere else? You know, these questions are going to come up. They are definitely going, it's not if they're going to come up, they're definitely going to come up. We live in a society, the Torah is then referring to human nature. Human nature is that there's going to be doubt about the way that nature cycles. That is just part of being a human being. The motivational speech here is, I mean, it was so, I enjoyed watching it very much, and he's a pleasant character and very humorous. As you know, he's saying, look, you got to understand yourself. He said, you got to just be more. And that's a motivational speaker about the self. But here is a motivational speaker about faith. And even when we say, look, you just got to believe. You got to believe that it's going to happen. You got to believe it's going to happen, but you got to make sure that it happens. And that is the beautiful challenge and tension of being a faithful person. It's not only relying on God, but setting the stage so that God can deliver for you. God's blessing can be there for you. And it's a simple message, but it's a complicated message, a beautiful message embedded in this story, in the story of agriculture. There is a tremendous story behind the story here, that what is being asked for is a human divine partnership in the running of the world. There's a comment here, Susie. I have to show you. Okay, fine. You have to. In Israel, it's different. The Tav Yarok, the green pass, and it's interesting how different societies are organizing themselves around the whole reentry question based on what's common in the society. Yeah, in Israel, you do your green pass.
The word key is
Yeah.
kasher. Kasher.
Indeed, exactly. So kasher, it's a definite. It's not going to be a possibility. You will definitely ask this question. You will definitely ask. Anybody else? Questions, comments? So go ahead. So let's end it here. Let me just do another pitch tomorrow. Come at 10:30 in the morning for I think what will be a really splendid presentation by Moshe Gold.